Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey into the foundations of Japanese society.
Specifically, we're looking at that pivotal shift, the arrival of agriculture and the start of the Yayoi culture.
Exactly. We'll explore how these changes, they didn't just alter daily life, but actually laid the groundwork for more complex social structures later on.
It's like understanding the roots, right? Where so much of later Japanese history really starts to grow from.
So, thinking about the timing,
Well,
what was happening elsewhere that kind of set the stage for this?
well, on the mainland, particularly in China, things were developing quite rapidly. Around the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, agriculture was already well established in the Yellow River
They
region.
were growing things like millet.
Millet, foxtail millet, yeah. And they had domesticated animals. Plus, technologically, China was advancing bronze tools, and then, crucially, iron tools started appearing around the 6th century BCE.
And politically, that was a huge period of change in China too, wasn't it? Leading up to the Qin and Han dynasties.
Absolutely. Big consolidation of power. And the Han Dynasty even pushed its influence into the Korean peninsula.
Right, the Lilang Commandery in Korea, established in 108 BCE. That's pretty significant context.
It really is. Because it's around the 4th century BCE, maybe a bit earlier, that we start seeing these new cultural influences arriving in Japan. They seem to take root first in northern Kyushu.
Okay, so this arrival marks the beginning of what we call the Yayoi culture. What are the defining features? What tells us we're in a new era?
Two things stand out most clearly. Wet rice cultivation and the use of metal tools, bronze, and iron.
Those sound like game changers.
Oh, completely. They fundamentally changed how people lived, how they interacted with the land, everything.
And the name itself, Yayoi, that comes from pottery, doesn't it? What was special about Yayoi pottery?
Yes, it's named after a site in Tokyo where this type of pottery was first found. It's typically reddish-brown, quite hard, and often less decorated or decorated differently than the earlier Jomon pottery.
So, a distinct technological marker?
Exactly. It's a key identifier for this period, which lasts roughly until the 3rd century CE. And this whole cultural shift, it seems strongly linked to movements of people from the continent, probably via the Korean peninsula, spurred on by those developments in China we mentioned.
Okay, let's dig into wet rice cultivation then. It starts in Kyushu and spreads pretty quickly.
Amazingly quickly, actually. Within maybe a century or so, it had spread east to the Kenai region that's around modern Osaka and Kyoto.
Wow, that is fast for that era.
It is. And by the start of the Common Era, maybe around 1 CE, it reached the Kanto Plain and even southern Tohoku.
And eventually even further north.
By the 2nd century CE, it had made it to northern Tohoku. So this rapid spread totally reshaped the existing hunting, fishing, and gathering lifestyles.
It wasn't just scattering seeds, though. The way they created the rice paddies evolved too, right?
Definitely. At first, they likely used natural swamps and low-lying wetlands.
Hmm.
Makes sense. Easier to manage water.
Sure.
But over time, we see evidence of more deliberate construction, expanding onto slightly higher ground, building bunds, creating irrigation channels.
Are there sites where we can really see this?
Oh, yes. The Toro site in Shizuoka is a fantastic example. You find these large, well-organized, partitioned paddies. There's clear evidence of irrigation and drainage systems. It really shows a level of planning.
A community effort, basically.
It must have been. But we also see other types, like at the Hayakingawa site in Okayama from the later Yayoi period.
What was different there?
There, the paddies are smaller, built on gentle slopes, almost like early terraces. Water seems to have flowed sequentially from one plot down to the next through small gaps in the low banks.
So different solutions for different landscapes, perhaps?
Probably. Adaptations to local conditions, maybe different scales of social organization involved.
And alongside these new fields came new tools, moving beyond just wood.
That's the other crucial part. Initially, you had wooden tools, things like the kikua, a wooden hoe, and the kisuki, kind of wooden plow or spade, even special footwear, taigeta, like wooden clogs for walking in the mud.
But then came metal.
Then came iron. We start seeing iron blades being attached to the edges of hoes and plows. Much more effective for breaking up the soil, obviously.
It had a huge difference, I bet. What about harvesting?
That changed too. Early on, they might have used stone sickles, maybe just cutting the ears of rice. But eventually, iron sickles came into use, sharper, more durable.
And processing the grain? Getting the husk off?
For that, they used wooden mortars, big ones called yuzu, and large standing pestles, tadajin, to pound the rice and remove the husks.
Okay, so iron was key for tools. But where did they get the iron? Did Japan have readily available iron ore?
Not really in the way we might think of large mines. A lot of the raw iron material, or perhaps basic iron ingots, seems to have been imported initially, likely from the Korean Peninsula.
Trade connections were important right from the start then.
Very important.
Yeah.
But there was some domestic production too. Japan has sources of iron sand, particularly in the mountainous Chugoku region of western Japan.
Ah, like the kind used later for swords.
Exactly that kind of resource.
Yeah.
So iron sand collection and smelting likely developed there. And this iron, along with other important resources like salt produced along the Seto Inland Sea coast, became part of these growing trade networks.
It's amazing how interconnected it all becomes: farming, tools, resources, trade.
It really is. And looking at the bigger picture, in Asia, rice cultivation is just massive.
Yeah, you think about population density historically. India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, these are all major rice areas.
And they've historically supported huge populations. The climate helps, of course.
The monsoon climate.
Right. The alternating wet and dry seasons, the heat, the humidity. It's ideal for many rice varieties. Plus, rice itself is highly nutritious, stores reasonably well, and people like eating it.
All factors contributing to its success and spread.
Definitely. And even today, something like 90% of the world's rice is grown and consumed in Asia.
Where did rice itself originate before it spread across Asia?
The thinking is somewhere in the border region of India and China, probably in subtropical uplands. From there, it spread and diversified,
Into different types.
primarily into two main types relevant here: indica, which is the long grain type, common in South and Southeast Asia, and japonica, the shorter grain type.
And japonica is what we associate with East Asia.
Generally, yes. In China, indica is more southern, while japonica is found more in the Yangtze River Basin area and further north.
So the rice that came to Japan was likely japonica.
That's the prevailing theory, yes. It probably came from China via the Korean Peninsula.
What makes researchers think that route is likely?
Well, there are similarities in the types of stone tools associated with early agriculture, like polished stone reaping knives, and also in pottery styles found across these regions, the lower Yangtze, Korea, and western Japan. It suggests a connected cultural sphere.
Are there different ideas about the exact path it took?
Yeah, there are two main hypotheses. One is that it spread from the lower Yangtze northwards, then across the Korean Peninsula, and finally to Japan.
Okay.
The other suggests a more direct route, perhaps across the sea from the lower Yangtze region, straight to Kyushu in Japan. Or maybe both happened.
Could be. So this agricultural boom and the trade, it wasn't just about survival. It seems to have enriched life in other ways, too. Material culture, for instance.
Absolutely. We see this reflected clearly in the pottery. It becomes much more diverse in form, suggesting specialized uses.
Like what?
You get storage jars called tsubo, cooking pots or kame, serving vessels, sometimes on pedestals, called takatsuki, even specialized steamers, koshiki. Each shape hints at a different part of preparing, storing, or serving food.
More elaborate food culture developing, maybe?
Seems likely. And it wasn't just pottery. We also see the beginnings of weaving.
Textiles, what were they using?
Plant fibers like
Yeah.
hemp, rami perhaps, and maybe even silk threads, though silk production likely became more significant later. But the basic technology for weaving appears.
You can really picture daily life becoming more complex. Where can we see examples of this early Yayoi material culture?
Sites like Karakokagi in Nara Prefecture have yielded really good examples of early Yayoi pottery. The tsubo, kame, takatsuki we mentioned, gives you a real feel for it.
And how people lived. Their settlements must have changed, too.
Yes, significantly. Alongside the traditional pit dwellings, we start seeing dwellings built at ground level. And a really key feature appears: settlements surrounded by moats.
Moated settlements, Kango Shuraku.
Exactly. Kango Shuraku, these become quite characteristic. It suggests a need for defense or maybe defining community boundaries, managing water, perhaps all of those.
Is there a standout example of one of these?
The Yoshinogari site in Saga Prefecture, Kyushu, is just incredible. It's a huge moated settlement that grew and was modified over the early, middle, and late Yayoi periods.
What's so impressive about it?
Well, it has double moats in places. Within the inner moat, archaeologists found remains of over 100 pit dwellings, plus evidence of watchtower structures built on posts about a meter square.
Watchtowers. That definitely points towards defense or monitoring.
It certainly suggests a more organized and perhaps more wary society. We also find elevated storehouses there.
Raised off the ground for grain storage.
That's the common interpretation, yes. Keeping the vital rice harvest safe from pests and dampness. It underlines how central grain storage was becoming.
So all this better food production, new technologies, stored surpluses, maybe defense. It must have changed social relations, too.
Profoundly. This more stable, productive way of life allowed for wealth accumulation. And once you have wealth, you start getting disparities.
Differences between individuals, between families.
Yes, and even between whole settlements. Some areas might have had better land, better access to trade goods like iron or salt. We see the beginnings of social stratification.
A move away from the more, perhaps, egalitarian Jomon communities.
It certainly seems that way. By the Middle Yayoi period, things get more complex. Think about managing those irrigation systems we talked about.
Needs coordination.
Exactly. Irrigation, flood control. These often require cooperation across a wider area, maybe multiple small settlements sharing a water source. And with cooperation comes the need for organization, maybe resolving disputes over water rights.
So leaders start emerging.
That seems to be the process. Powerful individuals or families, chiefs perhaps, who could organize labor, manage resources, maybe lead rituals, and mediate conflicts.
Rituals. Why would that be important for leadership?
Well, think about it. In an agricultural society, your life depends entirely on the weather, on successful harvests. Stable rainfall, no typhoons, no pests.
Right, things you can't control.
Exactly. So people who were believed to have some connection to the forces of nature, maybe through rituals or perceived magical powers, individuals who could appease the gods or spirits controlling the elements.
They would have held considerable influence.
Precisely. They might have been seen as essential for the community's survival and prosperity, making them natural candidates for leadership roles. Belief systems and ritual likely played a huge part in structuring these early hierarchical societies.
So, looking back this whole transition, the arrival of agriculture, the Yayoi culture, it's just fundamentally transformative, isn't it?
It really is. It's not just about farming techniques. It changed daily routines, diets, tools, settlement patterns, trade, social structures, belief systems, everything.
It truly laid the foundation for the more complex political and cultural developments that came later in Japanese history.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, doesn't it? This shift from hunting and gathering to farming. It's such a fundamental change. What does it tell us about the basic drivers of social complexity, not just in Japan, but maybe everywhere?
Yeah, how often do we see this pattern agricultural innovation leading to surplus, leading to specialization, hierarchy, and larger scale societies? It's a fascinating question to ponder.